sometimes ask people to guess my age, and they're normally kind to me. Depends what color my glasses are. I wear a black pair of glasses and yellow glasses. I've noticed that the yellow glasses shave off about 4 years off of my age. And so thank God for that. So if you're ever wondering, how do I get younger? You don't need to spend too much money other than to get a yellow pair of glasses, okay? But maybe that won't work for you. I don't know. I don't know what the key is. Maybe a leather jacket or ride a motorcycle, those things, or maybe don't watch golf, one of those things. And so, so today, 20 years ago, I had the opportunity. I had quite a crazy experience of connecting with God in my late teens. It shifted and changed the trajectory of my life. Many people would not have said when I was in my teenage years that I would be leading and pastoring a church. That would have been laughable. Many of our stories, for people that follow Jesus, people are often shocked, right? You? Yeah. So I was one of those youths. And so in my late 20s, but coming into my late teens and coming into my early 20s, I had the opportunity to come on staff at a church. And so I was in the process of finishing up my music degree, but I got an opportunity to move into full-time ministry. And so I ended up doing that and had some really great opportunities. And so one of the opportunities that I got was I got to go meet a lot of different leaders from across the world that were involved in the church. I ended up in spaces that I probably shouldn't have been in, just based on like the fact that they weren't bad spaces, but that, you know, as a kid that kind of grew up on the fringes, it just felt like, why am I here? So I got to meet a lot of pastors and leaders around the world, leaders that were in the church, not just on full-time vocational ministry, but a lot of leaders. And about twice a year, we'd have conferences at our church. And one of these times, I got to pick up one of the speakers, and it was somebody that had a massive impact in my life. I don't know if you've had an author in or outside of the church, an author that's really connected with you, resonated with you, and you just wanted to meet them. And then you actually meet somebody, maybe not even an author or a teacher, maybe it's a celebrity or a sports star, and you meet them, and you get all the weird feelings, right? You say awkward stuff that you shouldn't say, that you normally wouldn't say because you're a little bit nervous. You know the feeling? You want to tell them all the things, but you got 30 seconds. And so you try and pack it in, and you never communicate like that any other way, but you try to in those 30 seconds. Well, I had the opportunity to pick up this pastor and drive him to the conference. And so I went to the hotel, and I picked him up. And there's two things that happen when you meet somebody in a personal way. They either grow more endearing or they don't. I'm not going to share the less endearing stories, but this pastor was more endearing than anybody I had met before. I was young in ministry. I'd just been married for about a year. I was trying to figure out what it meant to be on staff at a church and to try and figure out how to navigate the emotional, spiritual, and vocational side and emotional. It's quite a lot to mix in there. And so he just started a conversation. I remember him coming out of the hotel, and I opened the door. I'm like, here you go. He's like, well, you don't have to open the door for me. I'm like, but I really want to, And I grabbed his bag, and I put it in the back of the car. And then he's like, hey, do you mind if we go to Starbucks? And back then, it was a big deal at the time. There wasn't a Starbucks on every corner, and I'm like, there's one nearby. And so we went, and we had Starbucks together. And the more that I got to know him, the more personal he became, but the more endearing he grew. And it's amazing to me that somebody that I had admired from afar, as I met up close, really changed the way that I viewed him, but also the way that I viewed God. And my fear in our culture is that we have a view of God that's impersonal. And because of that, we get a very limited sample size of who God is. And for somebody whose job is to teach and to lead, I'm in the God conversations every day. But within the cultural framework, words like vindictive, judgmental, legalistic, far off, doesn't care, on it goes, are some of the cultural distinctions of God. Because you see, I think many people are like this. People know of God. Like I knew this pastor or this leader, I knew of him. I might have read the books. I might have, at the time, bought the CD. Yeah, that's right. That's how old I am. You see, I had an idea of who he was, and many people know of God. But there's a difference between knowing of God and knowing God. Because there's this personal connection. And all of the Jesus story is not to simply get an idea of God. You see, people knew of God all along. The whole purpose of Jesus coming, and if you're new to the Christian faith and you're trying to figure it out and you've maybe heard tidbits here and there, I want you to know that the purpose of Jesus' life, both in his death and his resurrection and all that encompasses, was for the goal that God's people, the ones he loves, his daughters and his sons, would be able to be back in relationship with him. It's a personal thing. We've brought it into an impersonal place, but it was always meant to be personal, and it was meant for us to be in relationship with God and in connection with God. Somebody in the Old Testament displays this really well. This idea of not just knowing of God, but knowing God. And I find this character particularly interesting, and his name's Daniel. Now, Daniel got a lot happening in his life. You see, Daniel's life has both the incredible moments and the moments we never want to experience. It's like all of our lives. Every single day we have moments of intense joy, and then we have moments where we are like, I never want to experience that again. We have moments where our children comply, and then moments where they don't. We have moments where we're in deep connection with our spouse, and then moments of friction. We have moments where business is going well, and then moments where we're wondering, will it recover? We have moments in our life where we did all the things, we ticked all the boxes, we made sure that we dotted all the I's and crossed all of the T's, and everything should have gone according to plan. We did all the checks, we did all the balances, and still, it didn't turn out the way that we wanted to. And Daniel's life represents this. As a matter of fact, every character in the Bible has moments of consolation, good moments, and moments of desolation. And they seem to just be parallel tracks that run beside one another. Daniel finds himself as an Israelite in the Babylonian kingdom. He's taken as a young man from his home, and he's brought into slavery. He's indoctrinated in the Babylonian way, and he works his way up the ranks. He doesn't use it as an excuse. He uses it as an opportunity. Now, we can unpack that in another day. But there's things that Daniel refuses to let go of in his life. There's habits that Daniel displays. And there's commitments and a persistence that seems to permeate his whole story, but provides us a stability that many of us look for. And when we think about the 40, and particularly when we look at Daniel's life today, the purpose of doing this is to establish rhythms and a practice in our life, to be consistent in ways that we can interact with God. Not just to hear of him, but hopefully to have meaningful, personal connection. Daniel begins to climb the ranks of this empire. He grows to a place of influence and power, and people around him are jealous. Nationals are jealous, People that he's competing with are jealous, probably young men from other nations that are also competing with him or trying to take him out. And they can't find anything about his character worth taking him out on. They're looking close into his life, and he doesn't post enough nasty stuff on Instagram. It didn't exist back then, but just trying to make it a context, okay? But they're looking through his social feeds. They're doing all the background checks. He's getting followed. I mean, they're doing everything they can to try and find holes in Daniel's life, and they can't do it, except for one thing. There's one thing about Daniel's life that he's consistent in, that he's committed to, and that seems to give him the upper edge against his competition. Now, I don't think he's competing with them, but they are clearly competing with him. And what it is Daniel has a daily commitment to connect with God. And that's the thing that they go after. And so we're going to pick it up in Daniel. And this is where we interject ourselves into Daniel's story. Is Daniel always prayed? I want you to see the word always. Prayed to God 3 times every day. 3 times every day, he bowed down on his knees to pray and to praise God. Let's go to the next verse. And even though Daniel heard about the new law, what is the new law? Well, his competitors, the ones that were coming against him, the new law was that you can't pray to anybody, you can't worship anybody, you can't have any sort of commitment to any other deity other than the king. The only one you can worship is the king of the country. The only one you can worship, the only one that you can pray to, the only one that you can bow your knee to is the king. And Daniel, in spite of the law, he still went to his house to pray. He went up to the upper room of his house. He opened the windows that faced towards Jerusalem. And here's our next verse. And then Daniel bowed down on his knees and he prayed just as he what? Always had done. Now, Daniel's most famous for getting tossed in a lion's den post this verse. We know that he survives the night, or if you don't know the story, Daniel gets thrown in a lion's den, he survives the night, and the law is reversed. And so many of us take hope and take encouragement from the fact that Daniel faces this incredible enemy and still is able to overcome. He remains committed to God, and God sees him through. The part that we seem to miss, and the part that often I hear taught, is that we just need blind faith. In other words, in those moments, we just need to say, God, I'm here. But what we see clearly in Daniel's life is that there is a commitment daily to have time with God. And it's a habit that David creates. Because we know that successful people do consistently what other people do occasionally. That successful people do consistently what other people do occasionally. Now, you can take this into the marketplace and you can use it there, sure. But when it comes to our spiritual lives, and when it comes to our connection with God, it's in our consistency that we find success and growth. Now, success isn't always not always overcoming a lion. Like, you don't need to go to the Fraser Valley Zoo after the service and say, God, you got me on this one, right? Daniel prioritizes what matters to him most. He's rigid in his diet because in his diet, that shows a connection and it shows a commitment to God. He's consistent in his prayer to God. He's consistent. And it's this that gets him arrested. It's this that gets him thrown in the lion's den. It's his consistency that makes him lose his job. It's consistency that makes him lose his influence at the time. It's his consistency that seems to put him in an interesting predicament. And yet he maintains the habit. You see, some believe culturally that it takes 21 days to develop a habit. Nobody knows where this came from. It just exists. It's like somebody went to Urban Dictionary and was like, habit making, 21 days, okay. There's doctors and studies have shown that it's about 66 days, so just over 2 months. And other studies that show anywhere between 21 and 66 days. And so I was like, well, which one is it? Well, let's go in between, 40, okay? You like that? You're welcome, that's a freebie. But it's interesting to me that we put all these new numbers and we can do all these new studies. But over thousands of years, biblically, the word 40 is used over and over again, and it's a period of time. And the 40 is seen in the biblical context as a time of testing and of growth. It's a longer period of time than a week, obviously, or 3 days, but numbers like 3 and 7 pop up. But this 40-day period of time is the 40 years that the Israelites were in the desert after they were freed from Egypt. It's 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness developing, and both instances being tested and being tried. But it's a long period of time with uninterrupted focus, and it's seen as a type of holistic transformation. And when we think about habits, and we think about David's life, often the most overlooked part of the Christian faith, or about developing a habit of prayer, or about Bible reading, is just that, the habit itself. And we should never underestimate how God can do something big through one small habit. For the habits you have today, they will shape who you will become tomorrow. What I choose to put into my life, what I input into my life, and what I allow God to input into my life will become what I become tomorrow. And so the reason we did the 40 was we thought collectively as a church, what could we do to rally around what God says about us and to rally around how God can consistently speak to us? Because there's a lot of I know about God. But what would it look like when we start saying, but I know God? You see, it begins to make a shift in us. And so whether it's prayer or it's the 40, reading a verse every day, there's just 3 things that I want you to do as we begin this journey and we begin establishing the habits. And they're quite simple. But just 3 key principles on how to develop a habit. And particularly over the next 40 days, how to do it. So, let's talk about that. If we're going to establish this habit of reading every single day a verse, and we're going to start this habit of connecting with God on a daily basis, just 3 things. And this is the first one. It's just keep it simple. Here's what we did. It's 2 minutes to read the verse, to read the description, and you can skip the description if that's too much, and you can just answer some of the questions at the bottom. And some would say, that's too simple, Josh. But one of the key habits that I have in my life, that when I miss it, nothing else seems to work, is my brushing my teeth. If I don't brush my teeth twice a day, you're going to laugh at me, but if I don't brush my teeth twice a day, I fall out of rhythm really easily. And so it's a keystone habit for me. And it's true with our spiritual lives as well. Is if we want to hear from God, if we want to develop this connection with God, we need to start being consistent in it. And so the first thing is to keep it simple. And so what we did is every day for 40 days, you read one verse. And if that's all you do for the day, you're winning. And that's good. And if you've done that for the first 5 days, church, can we all put our hands together and celebrate everybody that for 5 days did that? That's amazing. That's amazing because we kept it simple. And you might say, but I want more. I'm always the last clap guy too at a wedding. I'm always the last one, so I applaud you. I clap last. Okay, so keep it simple. The second thing is this. If you miss one day, don't miss two. So here's the thing, is we go, I got busy that day. I guess I'll never do 40. If you miss one day, don't miss two. Just get back on the horse. Don't know where that expression came from. Next time I host, I'll let you know. But if you miss one day, don't miss two. And here's the third thing, is be kind to yourself. If I can say one thing about this, is I've heard too often that people shame themselves into better practices. But shame is a bad driver. Shame only lasts so long. And to be quite frank with you, it will separate you, not connect you to God. It will be a separation. And so being kind to yourself is saying, you know what? I didn't hit it yesterday, but I'm going to get back and I'm going to hit it today. And I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. Why? Because if we can establish a habit of daily connecting with God, and the goal is to daily connect with God, not be perfect. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to daily connect with God. Then what happens is we begin to develop a keystone habit in our life. And what happens over time is we shift from, God, I know of you, to somewhere in the middle. We begin to hear. We begin to have a little bit more joy or clarity, a little bit more kindness to the people that are around us that rub shoulders with us the most. Begin to have a little bit more patience. We begin to notice things shifting in our heart towards those people that we held maybe resentment or bitterness towards. And we don't know when it happened, but it started happening. And this is how the process works of transforming and developing habits. Is at some point it becomes not just routine, but then you begin to reap the benefits of the routine. And as you develop the habit of connecting with God by keeping it simple, that if you miss one day, don't miss two. Get back on the horse. Read the day. It only takes 2 minutes. Read the day before and the same day. And be kind to yourself. Say, you know what? I'm not going to shame myself forward on this one, but I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to move forward and I'm going to do it again. And as you develop a habit of connecting with God, you may in turn produce something that Jesus talks about. And we talked about it last month, but you may have this experience in your life that Jesus says in John verse 15, if you remain in me, look at this, and my words remain in you. This is the consistency that we also see in Daniel's life. Ask whatever you want and it will be done for you. This was the first verse that we had on the first day of the 40. And my Father is glorified by this, that you may produce, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, much fruit and prove to be my disciples. This fruit here is the love in our life, the peace, kindness, self-control, the patience that God brings about in our life. Here's the deal, as we remain in him. But it's a decision to stay connected and to remain. Similar to Daniel having the habit of prayer, so too in our life we need to have the habit of remaining. And it is the connection between a vibrant relationship with God and one that wavers. And if we're going to have faith or trust that stands the test of time, that even in the most difficult circumstances, remaining is the key. And as you develop the habit of meeting with God daily, and what we're hoping is that you would say yes to the next 40 days, that God would grow incredible things in your life. Resilience, compassion, mercy, grace would flow out of your life. Truth would give you clarity to those decisions you've been wanting an answer for. That you'd have peace in your life, that even though everything around you might be in unrest, that God, you know he is with you. And here's my hope for you and for our church. Now, I didn't say this to this person that I was going to use something, but every day we've been having people comment on our blog. And every day at the 40, you can go onto our website and people are commenting. You can go back and read them. And I think people are just awesome and brilliant. And so somebody posted a comment this week that I think it resonates with why we're doing the 40, but also gives us vision for the 40. And she sums it up like this. Her name's Connie. She's pretty awesome. Imagine if we all walked around producing fruits, love, joy, peace, kindness, self-control, patience, forgiveness, fruits of righteousness. This is those fruits. And loving the other. Look at this. What would that look like for our church, for our community, and for the world? Yeah. What would it look like? What would it look like for us to be attuned daily, walking with God? What would it look like in the relationship we have with our spouse or with our kids or with our community? What would it look like with how we are generous? Or what would it look like with our words? Or how would it look like for treating those people that we are that we employ, or the people that we are that we have to, our bosses? I just don't know. I couldn't figure out another way of saying that. But what would it look like in our world to have these things flow out of our lives? And here's what I keep hearing, and I'm just going to call the audible. I'm going to do it. No, you're not. What happens is when we remain in God, he does it in us. It's not the work of trying to be more loving or more gracious or more merciful. It's by putting ourselves in a place where God can speak to us, and his mercy and his grace and his truth and his justice and his mercy, all those things, that we can experience those, that they begin to flow out of our lives. Remain in me. And to end not on my words, but in the wise words of Connie. What would that look like for Centerpoint Church? What could that look like for Fort Langley and Surrey and Abbotsford and Vancouver and the world at large if the church was in step with God? What would it look like? And I believe the answer is in our consistency to remain in him. So, for the next 40 days, we're at about 35 now, but you can start at any time. Let's remain in him. Let's be consistent. And let's watch what he produces come out of our life as we put ourselves in step with him. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for our church and for those that are here. There might be some that have never engaged with the Bible or engaged with you, God, and I ask that as they open up their lives and they say, God, speak to me, or God, I'm here, that you would meet them there. For those that maybe have not built this habit into their life of being consistent with connecting with you, God, that it's so easy to try and shame ourselves for it, or it's so easy to think, oh, I should have known better. But God, that your kindness and your grace would meet them. And that as they open up the Bible, or as they open up their hearts to speak with you, that you would meet them there. God, I ask for our church, that in our community and in our church and in our world, that what we are known most for is you. Help us to be a people that reflects you to the world around us. Not just our own ambitions, not just our own projections of ourselves, but God, that you would be reflected to the world around us. Thank you, God, that you give us second, third, fourth chances. And thank you, God, that you've given us the Bible, your word, to speak to us and to encourage us, to show us the way, to reveal your grace and your truth. God, we need it more now than ever. I encourage us, I pray. Amen. So, we got these books at the end of service that you can grab on your way out. I know some of you are doing it online. I really like the look of this book, and it feels nice too. So grab one on your way out. There's one for every single person. Even if there's somebody in your world that might benefit from it, why don't you grab it and bring it to them? We're going to continue next week, and we're going to have a conversation about the Bible next week. And so I hope you come back, and we're going to talk about that next week and talk about the text itself. So I'm looking forward to unpacking that more. I hope you have a phenomenal week. Why don't you hang out for a couple minutes, grab a coffee. I saw the sun is out. Exciting, yes. But why don't you hang out for a couple minutes? If I haven't met you yet, would love to say hi to you or somebody else here. Spend a couple minutes, say hi, grab your kids, hang out for a bit. Have an amazing Sunday. We'll see you next week at Centerpoint Church.